Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Mike here at Game from Scratch, and today we have news on the Unity IPO front. Now, this goes back for quite a while. It's an ongoing saga. In case you don't understand, an IPO is also an initial public offering. What that basically means is Unity would become a public company instead of a private company. This means, well, they get a whole lot of cash. People say, hey, I will buy part of your company. And then you give them shares, and then they say, hey, here's what I think you should do with your company. So basically, you are trading cash for freedom. It's a very common trade-off, and the entire public stock market is full of companies that have gone public. So the IPO rumor started back in February of 2019. It goes back even further. John Enrico Gotelli, the CEO, they pretty much figured that he was brought on board to ultimately bring Unity public. Well, back in August 24th, they actually filed their paperwork to go public. This is something called the S1 document with the US SEC. SEC is the Security and Exchange Commission. These are the people that basically are in charge of stocks. If you commit stock fraud, it's the SEC that comes after you. If you want to register your company to go public, it is the SEC in the United States, anyways, that you file with. So they have filed to be publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. That was filed back in August 24th, and they amazingly enough got the stock symbol U. Hard to believe that was available, but yep. And as of today, Unity is now a public company, and we know how much Unity is valued at. So they got $1.3 billion in their IPO to value them at a total of $13.6 billion. And $13.6 billion. Does that even make sense to you in this world anymore? These huge numbers, you kind of look at them and go, yeah. All right, that's more than I'm going to make in my lifetime, and my lifetime of 30, 40, 50, 100,000 times over. So yeah, it is a big amount of money, but it's kind of interesting because Unity has actually been burning through money. As part of the S1 document that they filed, I did a video on that. I'm not going to rehash that, but we got details into their finances. And that's another one of the downsides of being a publicly traded company is you now have to disclose how much money you make. And going forward, we're going to find these things out. So they've been operating at a loss. The 1.5 million reported a net loss of 163.2 million on revenues of 541 million. In 2018, they lost 131 million on revenue of 380. Now, if you're a finance guy, what you'd like to see is growth. So that sales number of that to that is definitely a good thing. They increased their sales by about 30%. People like that. Now, they also increased their loss at about 30%. And now that they are a publicly traded company, there's going to be more pressure on them becoming profitable. And it's going to be interesting how that comes about. Now, interestingly enough, though, this $1.3 billion is actually a lot lower than what it could have been. And this is kind of an interesting thing that Unity did. I actually have to applaud them for this. They took something called a Dutch auction approach. This isn't technically a Dutch auction, but I could never find anyone to explain to me why what Unity did is not a Dutch auction. So if you are a finance-oriented guy and you can tell me in the comments down below how this isn't actually a Dutch auction, and if you're wondering, a Dutch auction is a way of selling shares. I'll explain it in a second. It's the way that Google went public when they did their IPO. We'll get to the details of it in a second, but ultimately their shares came out at $52 a share. They were originally expected to be 34 to 42. So there is definitely a win here. Earlier this week, they'd gone 44 to 48. So when opening at 52, that is some nice stuff. Now, it's not, I haven't seen any publicly trading details. I think that might be the lagging systems out there. So it's going to be interesting to see in the next week or so what actually happens with the stock. But they did something that really kind of slowed down how the investments were going to go. And we'll get to that right now. So you can see here, where is it? Yeah, right here. So John Riccitelli, CEO of Unity, previously of Electronic Arts and everyone's favorite person, said in a presentation before the IPO that the company referred to the event as a UPO, where Unity's own management team would choose who got the initial allotment of the shares, rather than the investment bankers choosing the investors. Department from the usual practice of an IPO was to be data-driven and select the investors that Unity wanted to partner with and find people who wanted to hold the stock for the longer term. Now, this is actually kind of an interesting approach. Basically, what normally happens with an IPO is the bank, or the leading investment bank, the ones that are basically underwriting the public filing, they decide who gets shares. So they go to all their cronies. They go to the hedge funds and the investment funds and other companies that work with banks and say, hey, would you like in? And normally those people are buying it at rock bottom, and then the market races up, and those people get a whole lot of money for doing pretty much nothing. What Unity instead does with this approach to it, which again is traditionally referred to as a Dutch auction, and I can't figure out why this isn't being called a Dutch auction, is they said, okay, give us your numbers. So everybody submitted to Unity that here we will pay you X per share. Unity looked at all those people and said, okay, we want to work with you, and you, and your dollar value sets the base mark. So basically, so they say, okay, we're going to set the price at $52 a share. Everybody that hit that amount got shares. Everybody that didn't. So it gives them more control over who actually gets to invest in the company. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily get you as much of a payday on day one. It actually kind of says to me that Unity wants more control over their future and that they have more faith in their product than you would expect. So they're not looking for a day one payday, where a lot of times you see an IPO, it spikes and then it tanks. And in this case, we should have more general stability. They left money on the table up front, but we also shouldn't have the tanking. Now, the interesting thing is who is getting paid today? And we've got Unity's big shareholders include Sequa Capital, who own 24%, followed by the affiliate Silver Lake Partners, who own 18.2%, JA Technologies with 8.2%. Unity plans to use money for its own financial flexibility and general corporate purposes, as well as to pay $125 million in debt from its credit facility. And John Riccatelli himself owns 0.4%, while Helgeson owns 4.4%. So there's how it breaks down. So yes, Unity now has $1.3 billion they brought in as this IPO. All those other people that hold shares and previously, well, their shares are now theoretically valued at, so if that 13.6, if you own a quarter of the company, you just had a $4 billion payday. So not a bad payoff for the investment that Silver Lake and similar companies did into this investment. So Sequoia Capital, for whatever they invested in the past, which I think was in the 400 million-ish range, just walked away with a 10-to-1 improvement on their investment. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how venture capital pays off. So yeah, that is the end result here. So Unity is now a publicly traded company. If you're interested, again, they had to file an S1 in order to do this. They disclosed a heck of a lot of information about the company, including, where they make money, who their competitors are, how they could go get into trouble, and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting read, and I will link this in the document down below. Another question you may be having is, okay, well, what about Unreal Engine? Unreal Engine, Epic Games, they are not publicly traded, but they did just raise more money. And if you're wondering who is worth more, well, technically Unreal Engine is. Unreal Engine is currently, or Epic Games, which is more than Unreal Engine, I got to be fair there. That also accounts for Fortnite and I don't know, their other stuff, some Infinite Blade or Infinity Blade and a couple of other properties. But basically, it means Epic Games is Fortnite and Unreal Engine. And that total combination is about $17 billion. Now, I'm going to figure Fortnite on its own is probably worth, you figure Minecraft sold for something like $4 billion in the past. I would say that Fortnite is probably valued in about that range as well. So when you take that number out and put on just game engine versus game engine, it's interesting because they both come out around $13-ish billion in value, which means the stock market and private equity in the case of Epic Games have valued Unreal Engine and Unity virtually identically. And again, it's a game of top trumps. It really, in the end, means literally nothing who is worth the more money. But the question of, is Unity going to have an IPO in 2020 has been answered. And the answer is yes. Yes, they are, and they are now worth $13.6 billion. Interestingly enough, and again, the shares opened at $52. It's going to be interesting over the next couple of days to see where those share values actually go. But I do, again, have to applaud Unity for taking the approach they did. It's nice to see that they're picking their partners as opposed to just, selling to the highest bidder. So they should then have better relationships with those shareholders going forward. And then again, one of the big downsides to an IPO is you're selling a bit of your soul. You're selling control of your company. And if you're selling that bit of control to people that you're willing to work with, hey, that works out pretty well. And that's kind of the approach they did. It also means that Unity, the board at Unity has faith in the future of Unity, and they expect, obviously, they left money on the table now, but it should ultimately pay off later. So again, what do you think of the IPO? What do you think of the valuation of Unity versus Epic Games? And yeah, what do you think in general? Also, if you are, again, more technically minded, could you please tell me exactly how this is different from a Dutch auction? Because I literally couldn't find a difference. As far as I know, this was basically a Dutch auction, but if you know the difference, please let me know. Comments down below, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.